Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shaylin Stimson, Director of Events and Strategic Partnerships at Tech Manitoba. I will be your host for today for our virtual event, Leading from the Inside Out, Self-Awareness for Women in Tech with Tamara Kraker. As we gather virtually at this Manitoba Women in Tech event, we take a moment to acknowledge that we are connecting from many places, each with its own relationship to land, history, and community. Manitoba Women in Tech is located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. We recognize the enduring presence, deep-rooted knowledge systems of Indigenous peoples across Manitoba, and we affirm our responsibility to work towards reconciliation in meaningful ways. As a community committed to innovation, inclusion, and connection, we reflect on how we can support Indigenous voices and perspectives in the tech sector and beyond. So I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today in this incredible community we've built together. Manitoba Women in Tech is the combined forces of Tech Manitoba, New Media Manitoba, and North Forge. Together with our amazing allies, we're here to create a space where we can share experiences, applaud accomplishments, and champion tech activities in an environment that is safe, gender inclusive, and judgment-free. So one thing that makes our community so special is the culture and the respect we uphold. We do have a code of conduct, but overall, it basically just says, be respectful, be kind, and support each other. It's the principle we live by, and we encourage you to take a moment to review the link shared in the chat. It does have the full code of conduct in there as well. So we recently shifted our community over to LinkedIn, and since we did that in June, we have had over 650 members join us. And this number is growing weekly and daily. So it's great to see such huge growth in half a year. So whether you're here to network, learn something new, or just meet others in the industry, this is the place for you. So real quickly, before we get started, I want to just bring up our next event. It is taking place in person, bright and early, Monday morning, 8 a.m. till 10 a.m. on February 23rd. It is going to be Rethinking Cybersecurity, Breaking the Myths Holding Women Back. And it's at Launch Co-working on Lombard. So we're partnering with ISACA Winnipeg to highlight perceptions about careers in cybersecurity and tech at large that might be holding back many women from entering the field. I know it's really early on a Monday morning, but it's also the perfect way to start off Manitoba Tech Week. So Manitoba Tech Week is hosted by us here at Tech Manitoba. It is Manitoba's premier celebration of technology and innovation. It's a week-long series that runs from February 22nd to 28th, so the Sunday to the Saturday. And currently there's over 50 different events on the calendar. Specifically, there are some really interesting ones bringing together women in tech. So definitely flag the Monday morning one, but there's lots of other ones to take a look at. And then now to the main show. So today I'm thrilled to introduce Tamara Kraker. Tamara is a coach, facilitator, and speaker specializing in self-awareness and relational intelligence in the workplace. After more than a decade as an elementary music teacher, Tamara has shifted her focus to leadership development and professional coaching. So her work centers on connection-based leadership, supporting professionals to lead with understanding, authenticity, and trust. At the core of her work is the belief that personal growth is organizational growth. Every shift in awareness strengthens not only the individual, but the culture around them. Your strongest team starts with a better understanding of you. So please join us in giving a warm welcome to Tamara.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Shaylin. I am really excited to be here, and I'm already loving some of the engagement in the chat, and I would love actually to get a little bit more engagement going. So I would love to hear where you're coming from today. I know a lot of us are from Winnipeg, so if you want to cite your neighborhood or where you're coming to us from, that would be great. But open up your chat and let us know, where are you coming from today? We got some Island Lakes, we got downtown. I'm curious, we got Exchange, Winnipeg, Bridgewater. Awesome, look at this. Awesome. People from all over the city. Fantastic. And I'm in Fort Garry. So my next question for you in the chat is, can you tell me one word for how you're arriving here today? So check in with yourself and type one word in the chat for how you are arriving here today. Thank you, Tina. We got community, eager, curious, perfect. Lots of curious, learning, expectant, interesting, love it. Eager, awesome. Awesome. And my next question, keep those coming. So just type them as they come to you. But my next question, and the last one we'll throw in the chat before we start the presentation, is I'm always curious when I say the word self-awareness, what is the first word you think of? What do you think of when you hear the word self-awareness? Looks like we may have a sound problem. We'll see if that gets sorted. Okay, we've got confidence. Thank you, Marnie. What do you think of when you hear of the word self-awareness? Deep thinking, clarity, empowered, acceptance, understanding yourself, introspective, honesty, how I react in different situations, controlling emotions, knowledge, intelligence. Okay. Oh, I love this. I love this. I'm curious, actually, if we have access to the chat after this, because it might be nice to gather some of these answers, because they are all true. Self-awareness is an incredibly wide topic. And so that's why I love doing this work, because we all come to this type of work with different experiences and different perspectives on self-awareness. So I'm going to just share my screen here, and we're going to dive into this topic a little bit from the perspective of what this looks like in leadership and what this looks like in our workplaces. So one of the first things that I like to talk about when it comes to self-awareness is what we're really talking about. Yes, all those pieces that you shared in the chat are incredibly true. They include all those pieces. They also include things like emotional intelligence. They include things like self-reflection. It includes watching behavior, understanding behavior, all those pieces. But what I've come to realize more and more is that growing in self-awareness is also growing in the understanding that there's things going on under the surface. So the definition that we're going to work off of today, and I would love to hear your thoughts on how you've seen this, the definition we're going to use today is that self-awareness is the growing understanding that we have needs and the observation of what happens when we don't have what we need. So the quickest and easiest way to understand this is through the concept of being hangry. Being hangry is an acknowledgement that when I don't have food, or when I don't have enough food in my stomach, or I'm feeling the need to find food, I behave in a certain way. So growing in self-awareness in this area would mean I notice that I'm hungry, or perhaps even I know when I am going to get hungry, so I'm going to start preparing for that. And then I'm going to observe what happens in my behavior. So self-awareness is more than just behavior modification. Behavior modification is really just the tip of the iceberg. And what self-awareness is realizing that all of our behavior has something going on under the surface. And when we can start noticing the things underneath the surface, that's when we can actually affect the change that we're hoping to see in our lives, because we're noticing that there may be a root to this that is deeper than we realize. So I like to use the iceberg model to talk about this type of work. So what we've already been saying here is behaviors, choices, and communication when it comes to being hangry. So if we refer specifically to that example, we're saying it seems to be that when I am hungry, I do this, 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 or this. So we're actually looking at behaviors, and that's honestly a fantastic place to start when it comes to self-awareness, because behaviors are those things on the surface. They are the things that probably annoy us about other people or we like about other people. They're the things that are most obvious for us to look at. But what we sometimes do is we stop there. We go, I didn't like it when you did that. So let's say that's in a leadership example. It bothers me when this person is always late. Well, when somebody is always late, there are any number of things that are going on under the surface that are leading to this behavior that we're struggling with within our leadership position. So the next layer underneath some of our behaviors is our emotions, our patterns, our beliefs, and our values. So often this is connected to some of our family stuff, some of the things that we've experienced in life, and they're informing how we are moving through the world and how we're making choices and communicating those choices. So another great place to start looking, and another part of our journey into self-awareness, is looking at our emotions, our patterns, our beliefs, and our values. And there's so many fabulous leaders out there and workshops out there to start looking at what are my core beliefs and values, because they will inevitably inform how we move through the world. And this is where self-awareness, we start to see that self-awareness is almost mislabeled, because the self, we're looking at it from the lens of our own perspective. But part of self-awareness is realizing that my self goes out there and interacts with other selves. So it's an inherently relational system. And when we are not able to look at how people are perceiving our own behaviors, choices, and communication, we're missing out on part of what self-awareness is. Because inevitably, the person that we're potentially having conflict with, or maybe we get along with, either has differing beliefs and values from us or shared beliefs and values. So when we can own what ours are, we can start understanding better why there may be a difficulty when we're relating to other people in our lives. It's almost like we need to start taking those right and wrong concepts off the table and going, this is the perspective I'm coming at it from, and it seems to be doing this. So going up to the top of the iceberg and saying, when I behave like this, it seems to do this to other people. Now, the part that we are going to really dive into today is that lowest level of the iceberg, the physiological and psychological human needs of each of us. So down underneath, whenever we have an emotional response to something, or where our beliefs and values are formed from, are from very core survival needs that every human being is born into this world with. So that's where we're going to do a lot of our work today. And what I'm hoping is that we can find some patterns in some of the leadership pieces that we look at every single day, and we can find what might be going on at this lowest level under the surface of some of our leadership traits. So what I've done is I've created a list of, I'm calling them visible leadership skills. And I call them visible leadership skills because they are the above the surface piece that we can look at, we can evaluate, we can say, I like it when it goes like this, I don't when it goes like this. But they're often the starting point of other pieces that are going on under the surface. So I would love for each of you to choose one of these things on this list. And this is not an exhaustive list. If you have other leadership skills that you want to dig into today, that is fine. If you're not a leader, these are all part of belonging to a team, belonging to a relationship or family system. These all are part of how we navigate moving through the world with other people. So I'm going to ask you to choose two. Choose one that feels pretty good for you. And then I also would love for you to choose one that you are hoping to see a little bit of growth in this year. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not good at it. Try to avoid that type of language, but an area that you see maybe has some frustration for you, or an area that maybe you admire in somebody else, an area that you want to see, hey, is there something else going on for me under the surface? So I'll repeat the instructions just one more time. Write down, either on your computer or make note of, write down one of these leadership skills that you feel really confident in, and then write down one of these leadership skills that you would like to see what else is going on. So you're hoping to maybe grow in that area of leadership. I'll read them over quickly, and again, feel free to add your own to the list. Communication and clear messaging, building and maintaining trust, decision-making and problem solving, delegation and empowering others, that one I think is one of my favorite ones to dig into, because each of us actually has tasks that we're really good at delegating and tasks that we feel a little bit like we want to tighten control over. And often that is at the bottom of this iceberg. There's something going on there that makes us feel like we want to control certain parts or maybe struggle to delegate certain tasks. Navigating conflict or difficult conversations, strategic thinking and planning, adapting to change and uncertainty, self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and I think that says time and priority management at the bottom. So what we're going to do next is we are going to dive into a poll. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask Shaylin to jump on. I've picked 6 questions that try to get to the core of human needs. So there's 6 questions, and each of the questions, there are 3 options. So I would challenge you just to go with what seems to be on your mind right now. So they're all situational. So for example, I'll read this first one here. You walk into a new space. Oops, hold on. You walk into it, they're popping in. So go through them and I will go through them as well. Try to go with what seems to be your first instinct. Do we need some instruction, Shaylin, on this?
Yeah, they slowly added in for me. So you'll see there's the chat tab at the
I can't seem to hear you.
Oh,
this might be an issue again.
Can everybody else hear me?
If everyone else can hear you, keep going.
But yeah, there's the chat. Okay, there's lots of thumbs up, so maybe. There's the chat tab at the top. If you just scroll over, there's participants, Q&A, and polls. So if you click on the polls tab, you'll see a bunch of ongoing polls that are happening, and then in real time, we're getting results too. So I'll let you take it from here, Tamara. We can still.
Okay, hopefully that made sense to everybody, because I don't know why I can't hear Shaylin. Perfect. So go through each of the questions and just submit what makes most sense for you. Now, what I will ask you to pay attention to as you're going through them is notice I've put them in a specific order. So notice if you seem to choose the first one most often. Notice if you seem to choose the second one most often, and if maybe you choose the third one most often. So it will just hopefully give us a little bit of a breadcrumb to follow when it comes to our next segment. Looks like we might be having trouble with full sentences in here. Let me pull up. I'll read them out, starting with the one at the top. So the top one says, you're starting something new, a job, project, or community. What feels most important to you early on? Understanding expectations, logistics, and what my specific tasks include. Or B, knowing how it works, who's involved, and where I fit. Or C, finding the spark, the person, purpose, or energy that makes it worth it. I'm only going to read 3 of these, and then we'll see how this goes. Sentences are too long. Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and we'll just dive into the content, and perhaps Shaylin can send out the poll questions to everybody later so you can have a look at them. So I'm going to go back to, hold on. I'm going to go back to sharing my window. So what we're talking about when we're talking about core human needs is we're talking about them in terms of 3 really basic needs that every human needs. So the first need that everybody needs is a need for self-preservation. So the human body moves through the world and it needs certain things. It needs to feel safe. It needs to have a house. It needs to have or I should say some type of shelter, it needs food, it needs things to keep the human body moving. The next thing that every human needs is they need a group. They need in terms of back when we needed survival skills, we needed a herd. We needed to feel connected to a community for our literal survival. Now that looks very different in today's world. That need hasn't gone away because as a human, we still have that need, but that need has shifted to, we want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like we have people that have our back. We want to feel like we contribute to something that is bigger than just us. And then the third need is a need to transmit into the world. It's a need to say, I'm awesome, and here's what makes me awesome. And I want to attract other people who are awesome to me. So it is this very human desire to transmit into the world, to experience the world, to take risks, to be in competition with other people, and to be uniquely ourselves. So when it comes to how we move through the world, here are the three kind of core needs at the top here. And what we're going to do is look at them each individually in an effort to notice, do I seem to think that one of these needs is more important than the others? Now, there's so many layers to this because, again, we're looking at the bottom of the iceberg, which means there's potentially some subconscious things going on. There's other things going on beyond just, do I have food in my fridge? So what I'm going to challenge you to look at is, of these three particular human needs, do I seem to focus more of my time, energy, and attention on one more than the other two? If we look at this kind of like a math equation, we're trying to ask the question, if I spend more time, let's say my life started out with us spending 33% of my time on preserving, 33% on navigating, 33% on transmitting, and I was able to balance being human in this world. But often we come through different stressors, different experiences that highlights one need over another. It feels like it's incredibly important to focus on preserving for a while in our lives, or incredibly important, I would say junior high is a time when like navigating feels really stressful. And then when you become more of an adult, you want to transmit and find what makes you special and move into the world. So this will shift throughout your life, but I would be curious if there may be a through line. So what I'm going to ask you to look at is, does one of these needs particularly stand out to me, or do I overfunction in this particular area? And as a result, do I underfunction in one of the other areas? So this will often play a huge role in how we lead, because we may have different priorities than the people on our team, or we may be highlighting something or really emphasizing something that isn't necessarily a well-balanced approach to what our particular organization needs. This obviously will blend into your home life as well, which I find quite often. So the first area that we're going to look at is this area of preserving. The areas that this covers are food and health, sleep and rest, money and finances, schedules and routines, comfort and safety. So when this area is functioning the way it's meant to function, one of these issues come up in one of these areas, we notice it and we address it. What happens when this area starts to overfunction, or it maybe has felt under threat at some point in our lives, or it feels like we can, during a time of stress, we maybe overfocus on it in order to feel more safe. When it gets overfunctioning, it can sometimes mean we overindulge in some of these areas, which would lead to underindulging in some of the other ones. It can sometimes mean that we become fearful or anxious around some of these pieces. And it can sometimes mean that we get really rigid. So if we go back to that topic of delegation, sometimes people find it really hard to delegate in this area, either in their personal life or in their work life. So again, if we take right and wrong out of that, there might be something to that. Perhaps this is a need that feels unmet for you right now. And that's why this particular area feels difficult to delegate. So it's not that you need to solve whether or not you're delegating, you probably need to solve if there's something deeper here that you need to listen to about yourself. In the area of navigating, which means yes, it's social groupings, but it's more than just being social or extroverted. It actually means the ability to navigate a social circumstance. So whether you notice people and situations, unspoken communication, teamwork and reciprocity, belonging, welcoming, relationship status, including hierarchy. People who are really attuned to this particular drive are incredibly aware of who is in charge in particular groups or the role and function of people within their groups. Now, you can probably already notice that when this is over functioning, that can become almost feeling anxiously attached to and analyzing group dynamics. You leave a group situation and you're trying to figure out why it went the way that it went. So when it's over functioning or feels particularly stressful for you, you're more prone to thinking about it. You're using extra time and energy for a very natural and normal drive that will come and go the way that it's meant to come and go. This can also mean there's potentially some fears around belonging. So I find this drive particularly helpful to notice in a team situation, because it's possible that there is someone that's hyper focused on this because of their past team situations, or perhaps they're so hurt that they've decided not to focus on this. So sometimes this can go to the bottom of the pile because of life circumstances. And it's not that this person doesn't want to belong in a community, it's that they have certain needs that weren't met, and now they're a little bit stressed about it. So if we can show a bit of compassion instead of assuming that, back to that iceberg, that top behavior that we're noticing, oh, they must not like us. It probably has very little to do with whether they like you. It probably has to do with their own stress or their own need not being met in this particular area. So the last area and the last drive and need for each human being is the need to transmit, the need to put yourself out there, the need to say, this is who I am, and I'm going to choose things in my life that make me happy and that really show my strengths in the world. And I want to attract people that support me in that. So this is the area of attraction. This is the area of noticing appearance of things. This is the area of energy, when you notice like chemistry of people. This is the area of competition, because there's something innately human about being like, oh, we're all in coaching. Well, how do you coach and how do you coach? And not that you are putting people down in any way, but that you're kind of going, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if I shifted mine, how that would go. Like, it's this area of comparison's the wrong word, but it's this area of betterment in this particular skill, and wanting to notice how you measure up in certain areas and what you can do to do differently. This is also the area of risks and adventures. This is the area that says, I could stay in my comfort zone, but what if I didn't? What if I tried something different? And this is the area of connection. So when this drive is over functioning, when we're doing a little too much, we're feeling a little stressed about this and we're focused too much on this, it turns into kind of a repetitious attraction to old hurts and wounds. You're kind of going, I want people to see what makes me so great. I'll try this again. I'll try this again. I'll try this again. I'll try this again. It becomes repetitious. This is also sometimes where people start feeling restless or restricted or distracted. They kind of feel like life isn't really, it's not lighting them on fire. They really want to show people what is so not necessarily so great about them, but they want to be alive. They want to feel alive. They want life to sizzle and be exciting. And so when it feels like that is the top priority, it starts looking like the other two don't feel quite as important. You're kind of focused on that one. So take just a minute and go back to your 2 leadership skills that you wrote down. The one that was something that feels really strong for you, and the one where you kind of want to see a bit of improvement. Now, I find the best way to look for areas that might need a little bit more of my attention is to look for sticky spots. Our best work is done in a tiny little moment of discomfort. So when I went through each of these 3, where in each of these 3 was there a moment where you kind of relaxed in your body? Where was there a moment where you kind of tensed a little bit, or you thought, why should people care about that? Or you thought, oh, I know someone that's like that. So when our mind goes to those comparisons, or it tries to make a reason for not keeping that as a priority in our lives, we often call that actually the fear zone, which is that zone right outside the comfort zone. It's that little bit of discomfort where we go, it doesn't feel safe for me, so I'm going to decide it's not safe for everybody. So that's where we often find conflict with people who have different priorities than us. It's all those pieces. So paying attention to the area where you have strength and the area you want to potentially grow in this year. See if you can find a little moment that feels a little bit uncomfortable and just sit there. Perhaps you don't want to sit there, and I totally get that. But see what else is there. Is there an emotion that's begging for your attention there? Is there potentially a person that comes to mind? Is there an experience that you have in that particular area? Now, the beautiful part about the circle of change is what I call it, is we have our comfort zone, we have that moment of discomfort or fear. Right outside that is learning. So sometimes part of our learning with those skills that we really want to grow in as a leader, part of it is just understanding why we may have a fear around it in the first place. Understanding is hugely valuable for us. If we can understand why that might be there, then we can start observing it very neutrally instead of saying it's right or wrong to behave this way. And then we can start noticing when it does shift and change, and we can invite in new ways of thinking about it. So one other way I just want to look at this, I want to make sure I'm staying on time because I could talk about this forever, but hopefully there's some questions about some of this at the end. One other way to look at this is from a specific leadership lens. So if we looked at this specifically from a leadership strength perspective, or perhaps you will notice a leadership, an area of challenge for you, often leaders who are really strong in preservation, so that seems to be an area that they think a lot about, are often very aware of an organization's need to have money, finances, and budgets sorted out. They're very aware of schedules and day-to-day systems and operations. So this is an incredibly crucial part of leadership and organizational development. We need this type of leader. When this is all we're focused on, or when we're over-focused on that, the other two areas fall short. So the second area of leadership is relational. This is your area where there's team building, there's organizational design, you have strategic planning and forward motion where you go, I want to make sure everyone's roles are aligned so that we're all working our best. It's the group mentality that is necessary in every single organization. Human resources is interesting because it actually tackles all three, but at the core of human resources is the ability for people to be safe within their workplace. And so it is often an inherently relational part of our organizations. The final style of leadership is catalytic. This is the transmitting of a full organization out into the world. This is saying our organization wants to grow and expand. So these are the leaders that are constantly innovative. They are almost jumping off a cliff before the systems and other pieces are in place. If all you have in your organization is a catalytic leader, you're going to feel stressed out. If there's an over focus on risk taking and on expansion before you're ready, it's not going to work out the way we think it's going to work out. But if all we're doing is the stabilizing pieces in our organization, almost the exact opposite drive, we are going to continue to plod little by little forward, and we're not going to see the growth that we are potentially capable of because we are not willing to take that little bit of risk forward. So hopefully you're starting to see that all of these elements are crucial to our organizations moving forward and are crucial for us to develop within our organizations in order to invite in talent and people that fit all of these different areas. Because organizations that inherently focus on one of these over the other two almost bias themselves away from some of those types of people in their organizations. We actually need all three developing and growing in order to be healthy and balanced. So we're just coming to the end of this formal piece, and I'm going to ask you two questions related to those two those 2 leadership skills that you wrote down. The first question is, and it's going to feel a little bit not related, but kind of keeping those in the back of your mind. What do you want your impact to be on your team and in your workplace? So perhaps this is a good time to write down, is there an emotion? Is there a feeling? Is there a phrase? Is there something that you have thought about in terms of your particular role on your team? I'm going to ask this question 2 more times and see if you can think about it from a new perspective. What do you want your impact to be on your team and in your workplace? I'm going to ask it one more time and see if there's something new that can come to mind this time. What do you want your impact to be on your team and in your workplace? So when you look at those answers, how do they make you feel? How do you feel about those particular goals that you have? And my final question to wrap this up is, how does that relate to the leadership skill that you mentioned as your strength and to the leadership skill that you mentioned as your goal? Are they in alignment with what impact you want to have? Or are they potentially from a different need that we kind of looked at earlier that you are trying to solve in a leadership position when it potentially is something that is a need for you to look at? So just before I quit sharing, I realized I didn't go over the difference between self-reflection and observation. So self-reflection is something we're very good at. Sometimes it turns into rumination, and it's looking back and saying, this happened and I wonder why. It's a past reflection. Self-observation is actually catching yourself in a moment. It is checking in with yourself right here, right now, and noticing something. It is also when you start looking at those leadership skills that you want to develop, it's noticing when they start to shift and change. It's paying attention in real time and observing how you feel when those things shift and change, and the shifts and changes themselves. So just before I close this off, my challenge to you is to, how do I stop sharing here? My challenge to you is to write down one thing that you want to observe about yourself this week. If it is in your workplace or in your leadership role, that's great. If it is more personal, if it is kind of in that emotion, belief, or value realm of the iceberg, or potentially in one of those preserving, navigating, or experiencing the world, transmitting into the world drives, pick one thing. Pick one thing to observe about yourself this week and see what happens. I think we get very eager to do a bunch of things, and that's lovely, but it's also, it is not what's going to give us our longest term change. Because I'll remind us again, we're not dealing with just with behaviors here. That is going to be our ticket in, but we're dealing with things that are really core to who we are and are feel a lot more important probably than we initially realize. And so if we're going to shift something that is core to our human needs, it's got to start really slow and really intentional, and it's got to be something that feels doable. We don't want to make that fear zone so big that we just slingshot ourselves back into comfort zone. So choose one. I would love to hear about it in the chat if you are comfortable sharing, or I know Shaylin's got my email address. Feel free to reach out. I would love to hear what you thought about this, if you had any new epiphanies or thoughts about your leadership or how you view the world. Feel free to reach out anytime. Okay, so Oh, there's Shaylin.
Sorry, it takes a minute for that to
No,
load.
it's all good. It's all good.
I'm glad you can hear me.
Yes.
So we're gonna pop over to the Q&A tab. It's kind of right before the polls. So if you're able to find that one, it's over there too. This is the portion where we can ask Tamara any of your questions.
Oh, I lost you again.
Oh no.
Let me turn
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
I don't know why I can't hear you. Sorry, Shaylin. So I see there's somebody who wrote, "How can I learn my Enneagram?" Great question. You are welcome to contact me and I would love to chat with you about that. But honestly, the Enneagram is such an interesting system that you can learn from so many sources. I learned my Enneagram by reading a book. So feel free to just read a little bit if you do want a little bit of coaching or support in your exploration of the Enneagram, then you are more than welcome to reach out to me and I will sit down and help you with that. I do something called typing interviews. And so we can sit down, we can look at what your Enneagram number is, and I can show you some really specific ways that you can incorporate that into your life. I'd be happy to.
Wonderful. I don't know. Our Q&A is really quiet, but everyone was very interactive throughout your presentation. I feel like you were so busy asking us questions that we don't have any questions for you.
That's okay. You know what I'm going to try and do is I noticed somebody was asking me to go back a slide. They needed more time with a slide. So I have my slides as PDFs. Is it okay if I throw those in the chat?
Yeah, if you can upload the file there, or if it doesn't work, I can send it out.
I don't think it's going to work this way.
Okay.
It's looking
Email
like
it to me, and then I'll send it out in the post follow-up.
Okay.
I'm also going to share the YouTube link with this entire presentation recording, so everybody can watch it back then too.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm trying to read your lips because I can't hear you again, but I think what you said is I'm going to send it to you. Perfect.
There's questions, Q&A.
Q&A? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm on it. Mm-hmm. How do you personally measure the impact you're making on people you lead or influence? That's a really good question and a difficult question. My first thought is having regular check-ins with your people. So I think that trust and transparency is incredibly difficult to develop in a workplace without really consistent proof that trust and transparency is part of your system. And so if you are wanting to get honest check-in from the people in your organization, I think you need to develop relationships over a long period of time and incorporate pieces of that in those regular meetings. So if you're having weekly one-on-ones with everybody on your team, include pieces in there. Include like personal check-ins, like how was your weekend? But then have a series of questions that you use regularly, like what's going well for you this week? What do you wish I could help you support? What do you wish I could help support you in? So having a couple of those really regular questions, it will be a process of learning that their responses to you are going to be taken well. So that's your job, is to be open and transparent and say, I'm open to feedback in this area. But making it a regular occurrence will increase that relationship. Thank you for the question. Any advice for when you're affected by others who are not showing balance? That's a tricky one. I think what is the best part about these 3 drives is that it gives you a window into when you're not getting along with people sometimes, because I have a good friend in my life who my highest drive is preservation, and her highest drive is transmitting. And so we often don't see eye to eye on very basic things because it feels really important to me to have timelines and to know exactly what's going to be happening, and it's not as important to her. So part of that is communication. Part of it's communication, and part of it is doing your own deep dive under the surface and going, every time I interact with this person, it does this to me. I wonder what's going on below the surface for me. So partly it is a better understanding of yourself. And then hopefully that will, instead of us putting our thoughts and feelings on others, like that makes me mad when you do that, instead going, I wonder why it makes me mad when you do that. That tends to open up the field a little bit so that you can have those conversations and say, it's actually really important to me to know when dinner is. Can we do that? So I know you're referencing something potentially more triggering than just what time supper is. But the same kind of philosophy applies, that the first place we need to look is why we're feeling so out of balance by people who are presenting a particular behavior that's frustrating us. There is still some work for us to do that's happening below the surface. Thank you for that question. It is probably there's probably a more complicated answer that a therapist and other people probably would like to weigh in on. So thank you for that, but a complicated situation. How do you grow in the skill areas of having difficult conversations? Great question. Difficult conversations are an area of growth, I think, for everybody. Even people who don't mind having difficult conversations, they will still have boundaries and barriers around what they want to engage with. And so I think probably to grow in that skill is partly this skill of self-observation. When you move into a difficult conversation, or when you know a difficult conversation is coming, check in with what else is going on for you. Is there an emotion specifically that's being triggered? And with that emotion, is there something underneath that? Are you feeling like that relationship is in danger? Are you feeling like your role within a group is going to be questioned? So if you can kind of understand why that's feeling particularly stressful for you, then when you move into that difficult conversation, you can start to take some of those pieces off the table. Because often our difficult conversations aren't actually about whether we belong, but we're putting our fear of belonging into the conversation. And then it adds all kinds of emotion and layers and complication to the conversation that don't necessarily need to be there. So our ability to look at it prior to that is really helpful. And then to move into that space and start reminding ourselves, I keep being afraid of this not belonging. Is it true? Is that what I'm actually receiving from this other person? So ultimately it is practice, and the other piece of it is more self-awareness about why we're feeling stressed about that conversation. Thank you for that question. What practices help you stay grounded and effective when things get hard? Great question, Tina. I think that those are actually often related to the 3 drives. I think that for me, the practices that are best to keep me grounded relate specifically to preservation. Knowing that I have my food in order, knowing that I have time to relax, knowing that I have schedules, like knowing all those pieces are really helpful for me. So often the drive that we are kind of more focused on, when we can manage some of those pieces, they help us feel grounded in all the other drives as well. Great question. I really like knowing the preserving, navigating, and transmitting and where I might be defaulting. How can I know maybe where my team members might be? It feels like this would be a great to know and really helpful. Great question, Louise. One of the ways that you can notice it is in when those particular issues come up. So when somebody is really high in the preserving, it means that they kind of get a little bit fixated around those particular areas. So in the areas of food, scheduling, money, those things. So it's helpful to notice, do they seem quite rigid around those pieces? When it comes to the social interactions, those are the people that are calling you and checking in on you after. They're going, we're all good. I had so much fun. Did you have so much fun? So they're the ones that, honestly, people are constantly sending us messages about what their priorities are. So if we're paying attention to what people are communicating to us, they're likely communicating one of these 3 drives to us. If somebody is really high in the transmitting one, they're often the first person to call to be like, I really want to go try this. They want to like take the adventure and take the risk. So they're the ones that you probably call when you want to like try something new and nobody else wants to go with you. So if you can start noticing how they seem, when they seem to be contacting you and why, sometimes those things come to the surface just in general. Hopefully that helps. There's more there, but thank you for that question. How can you be an effective introverted leader leading an extroverted team? I think that that is a fabulous question, because I think when we're talking about introverted, we are often referring to the fact that people maybe drain us, or we'd prefer to spend more of our working time alone. And I think that that is not necessarily a barrier to leading an extroverted team, but needs to be communicated. And I think part of that work is for that leader to realize, what is it actually that's draining me about my team? And what are ways that I can support their extroversion that don't drain me? Because there are lots of ways that we can interact with people that are positive and uplifting, but still allow us to have our particular boundaries is probably the best way to look at that. And that could be related to making sure that let's say if preserving is a really important piece for you, making sure that you're taking care of your preserving, and then you're setting time limits on the other pieces that aren't as valuable to you, but maybe helping a team dynamic in a way that you can offer to your team. I feel like there's more there. I'd love to continue that conversation. Thank you. Feel free to email me. Can these be situational? I think they can be, but I think they operate on multiple levels. I think they operate situational, but I think they are ultimately really, really subconscious in some ways that we can't always put our finger on. And so I think we need to look at them in both contexts. I think that when life feels stressed out, sometimes we revert to a very specific way of coping with it. And that's often because of a really deep, deep need, a subconscious need that's operating. So I would look at it through a couple of different lenses. I would notice patterns that seem to happen day to day. I would notice patterns that happen over time. And I would notice patterns in particular times of stress and health. Great question. What practices help leaders stay self-aware as their influence and responsibilities grow? I think that leaders really need to develop a practice of checking in with themselves. Jane Helbricht often talks about making time to lead. I think that leaders really, really need to have on their schedule time where they deal with what's going on for them. Because going back to one of those other questions around like, how do you open up spaces of trust to hear from your team? There is inherently a power dynamic between leaders and their team that is really difficult to ever really overcome in the workplace, and maybe shouldn't be. I'm not sure. There's so many perspectives on that. But a leader really needs to have time to look at their own responses and reactions to things. And then I actually think it's really, really important for leaders to have an outside source, to have a coach or to have a support team or to have like a little leader group that they check in with. Because the more we try and roll it around in our own head, I don't know that goes anywhere super positive. We really need time, yes, to reflect on things ourselves, but also time where we are bouncing things off of people in our lives so that we don't kind of end up in our own echo chamber. So both pieces, I would say. Thanks.
Awesome. I was just going to pop on stage before we get too many more questions. Thank you, everyone, for engaging so much in all of the ideas that you wanted to discuss further with Tamara. That was great.
Yes.
We went from no questions to a bunch. So yeah, that was amazing.
Yes.
And a huge heartfelt thank you to you too, Tamara. Thanks for sharing with us your time, your experience, and all your wisdom.
Thank you.
Helping us understand how we can be better leaders.
Thank you.
And thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's event. Like I mentioned, I will share the deck when Tamara sends it to me. I'll also share out the recording, so feel free to rewatch or share with any of your friends and colleagues. And then if anyone wants to stick around and network, we will leave the tables open till about 1:15 p.m. So thank you so much for joining us today. Hope to see you at our next event on February 23rd and at Tech Week.